Claudio Almeida, the president of ABEN, the Association of Brazilian Nuclear Energy. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. So I would love to hear about how your start in nuclear energy began. I know that you spent time at the IAEA and safety issues, but for you, where did it all begin?
Well, I was born in North Brazil, but I moved south very early when I was a baby. And I got my degree in electrical engineering at the University of Rio Grande do Sul, which is the southmost state of Brazil. When I finished the course in the last year, I was already taking an additional course on Introduction to Nuclear Energy that was given in the Physical Institute. In the conclusion of this course, they offer a fellowship in one of the CNEN institutes, research institutes. And I decided to come to São Paulo, where they have nowadays IPEN, at that time was called Institute of Atomic Energy, EA, and I was starting my master's degree over there. But at that time, I was already being trained for the as an operator of the research reactor and start the nuclear program. But then the president of CNEN, Professor Hervásio de Carvalho, who was the first PhD in nuclear energy in the United States, had the great idea of creating an elite group to send to the United States to be a core of a Brazilian nuclear program.
Brilliant.
So he requested that each one of the master programs in Brazil select 2 people to come to Rio. And I was selected by Olga Mafra, which was my advisor over there, to come to Rio. And I joined other 8 people to start this program, which is called Special Master Program.
Already you were part of the core of elite nuclear engineers in the country.
We are selected people, that I'll tell you. There was a very difficult course, and we had 8 people and only 6 finished because of the restrictions that we have. And when I finished, of the 6 that finished, 3 went to MIT. So we were accepted by MIT at that time. And I stayed 4 years in the United States at MIT, and I got my PhD working with simulation of kinetics problems in reactors.
Kinetics problems. What are kinetics problems?
Well, there's transients that are simulated in the core of a reactor. So I developed a nuclear computer code to do this kind of simulations. And then when I finished, I came back to Brazil. And I was very lucky that at that time, Brazil had not only started the construction of Angra 1, which when I went to the United States, there was nothing nuclear energy in Brazil. When I came back, they were starting the construction of Angra 1, and they signed this agreement with Germany. It was a large technical cooperation agreement, which involved the transfer of technology for nuclear energy, and with the dreaming construction of 8 reactors.
Yes.
And also the transfer of the whole fuel cycle from mining, production of enrichment with using the jet nozzle process, and then the fabrication of fuel fabrication from powder to elements, and also even reprocessing was involved. Of course, this program was not completed, and only Angra 2 plant was constructed.
Tell me about the mentality at that time, though, because that's a very bold vision to bring all of the skills and know-how for the entire fuel chain here, to build 8 gigawatts of plants. It's so exciting, and I want to recreate that sense of momentum again at some point. Would you remember what it was at that time that everyone coalesced around that vision?
Well, first of all, Brazil was growing at 12% a year at that time. And of course, if you look forward, you see that you're going to need energy. Yes. And nuclear was a solution because we thought that the hydro plants in the south region and east region were exhausted, and the north was very far for transmission at that time. So the idea is nuclear is the only solution. Nobody was talking about the wind power or solar power at that time. And of course, there was the idea that we have to increase the nationalization. So we have to transfer technology. So the first plant will be bought from Germany. The second one will increase the participation of the nuclear industry. Yes. So all the industry was interested in qualifying for nuclear construction. Unfortunately, the program was very well planned, but very badly or executed. So we have difficulties. And then we have a crisis, economical crisis.
It's usually the economic crises that have been the death knell of this industry.
Yeah. But then when I came back, there was lots of offers in all the new organizations that had been created, Nuclear Brass especially, but also the universities and everything. But I decided to stay at CNEN that have provided my fellowship in the United States. And at CNEN, we created the first technical group to do the review and analysis in the license of Angra 1 at that time. Angra 2, but. So we created a group called Core Analysis Group, doing calculations of the core. But then other groups were created later for civil engineering, mechanical engineering, instrumentation control, all the areas that need to be revised. And these groups work in a matrix organization. So the groups were specialized, but then there was projects across that will have projects using these groups. And later on, I was put in charge of what's called Mission Angra 1, which was the review and analysis of Angra 1, and later on, even the commissioning and inspection of the plant. So I work during this time in the Angra 1 plant, very little in Angra 2. There was another mission Angra 2. There was another person that was in charge. And for Angra 1, which was our first plant, we didn't have experience to do the assessment, especially commissioning tests. So when Maurice Rosen, who was director of the Division of Nuclear Safety of IAEA, came to Brazil, we proposed a technical cooperation project with the assistance of our agents and the US NRC. And the US NRC provide the experts, and the agents provide the funds. So whenever we have a problem or a specific requirement, we will call the expert from the US NRC and they'll help us. On the other hand, we also send our people to go to US NRC, to their offices or to the training centers to be trained. And myself, I went to the organized course here, but I went to the simulator of US NRC to be trained to license the operators. We have no experience how to license reactor operators. So we have experts from US that came here and sit with us preparing the examination and even witnessing the projects. With that, I came very involved with the IAEA, with US NRC. And we wrote the license for Angra 1 based on the models that US NRC used to do. So basically it was the same thing I did the writing. And in 1981, the plant went into operation, which was very good.
Yes.
And at that time, we have a very good cooperation with US NRC, but then we have the problem of the D2 steam generators. We have a vibration problem in the steam generator, not in Brazil, abroad.
Yes.
But these affect Almaraz in Spain, Ringels in Sweden, Crisco in Yugoslavia, several reactors in the United States. And we decided to halt the commissioning of Angra 1 plant. So the commission was up to a certain level, I think 70% power, and then we stopped. We wait for a solution of the technical problem. And at that time, I moved to Vienna. That was the time that I moved to Vienna.
And tell me more about how these technical issues influenced what the industry did from that point forward.
Well, we have lots of discussion with other partners that have the same problem. The Swedish especially did some mock-ups and they did experiments. Westinghouse found a solution for the problem and was implemented here later on. But all the plants have to do the same, look for the same solution.
I see. So we saw a couple of these plants which were all roughly similar, having a couple issues, and then we understood what that problem was, came up with a solution for that problem, and disseminated it to all of the plants even before they had the problems.
Not only the plants were similar, the steam generator is exactly the same.
Exactly the same steam generators, okay.
Yeah. But then what happened? I moved to Vienna because in 1980, Crisco plant in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, now Slovenia.
Yes, I was just out there.
Is a sister plant of Angra 1. It's very similar.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's
very,
amazing.
very similar. So the agents, they request assistance from the agents, and the agents organize a large mission, some 10, 12 people, to go there and look at several aspects. And because they knew that I was in contact with IAEA, they invite me to go in this mission under the leadership of Enzo Ianciti from the nuclear safety of nuclear installation section. And of course, for me, it was very easy to go to Crisco because the plant was exactly the same. I could walk blindfolded in the plant, and it was very impressive. And of course, we did the mission. We made recommendations to them. And Enzo liked my work, and he said, "Why don't you apply and come to Vienna?" So there was a post in the agents, and I applied for this post. And when the commissioning of Angra 1 was halted at 70%, it was nothing else to do until the steam generator problem was solved. I moved to Vienna, theoretically for a short time, but I remained 14 years. But I went there to the Division of Nuclear Safety. At that time, it was division, not department. And I worked under Enzo Ianciti. And what I was doing was the same thing that I did in the beginning at the agents, at the commission, was to do calculations for reviewing analysis of design of nuclear power plants.
And what kind of analysis would you review? Would it be the system failure? Would it be of consequence of radiological exposure? What are the different
was accident analysis, basically thermohydraulics analysis. But it was interesting because the idea was to put computer codes that do these models in the agent's computer that was very powerful at that time, and make them available for people to come and do the calculation, because the agent doesn't have a problem. The countries have a problem. And of course, from practical point of view, only countries that are nearby Vienna could come and do the calculations. Because it involves going there and doing the calculations. Brazilian would be very expensive to go to Vienna, spend a week. So we have countries like Hungary, Czechoslovakia that are bordered with Austria, Bulgaria that is nearby, and Poland that was at that time also constructing a reactor. All VVR types, all Soviet design. So I was start to get involved with the design of Soviet reactors at that time. And these people who were working separately, each one of them, they'll come for 2 weeks in Vienna, go back to do analysis, then another group will come, and that was the way they did. This is time of Cold War. So the Americans was not very happy that we are transferring technology with the codes, especially the relap code that was very close American. And the Russians were not very happy because we are identifying problems of their plants. So it was very difficult time from the political point of view to work. And also the countries were not cooperating among themselves. So what I promoted was the exchange of information among them. We organized meetings either in Poland, in Sofia, or in Hungary, even in Varna, in Bulgaria. And we put them together and say, you're doing the same type of calculation. Why don't we exchange information?
You were like a diplomat.
Yeah, I was more or less that. And the Russians, of course, got involved because they were interested. So they come and they discuss. And this was very good. It was a very good time for them. They identified problems. They got solutions. And they modeled things. But then there was a question. These computer codes were developed by the Americans for American plants. And we are using VVR plants. I don't know if you know, the American steam generators are vertical, and the Russian steam generators are horizontal.
Yes.
The fuel is different. The way that they operate a little bit, they have 6 loops, the old VVR reactors. So,
and they were smaller too.
They're smaller too.
And still had 6 loops. Is that because the horizontal steam generators fundamentally can't have as much heat throughput as a vertical one?
No, I don't know the background of the design. It was a decision that was the steam generators are very good because they're very have a big inertia. They're very big. It's like a boiler, not a steam generator. But what happened then is that we did these calculations and we got information that the Hungarians have a test facility that simulates a VVR reactor. And they were having difficulties to complete this facility. So through the agents, we decided to support the facility in Hungary providing equipment from the West that they didn't have in the East, and in exchange of the data. So we organized what we call the standard problem exercise. They did an experiment, and we provide the information before the experiment to the partners, and they'll do the calculations, try to predict what's going to happen in the experiment. Mm-hmm. And then later, after the experiment, we'll compare the results with the predictions. They'll do another calculation. We did 4 of these experiments in PMK. It was called PMK NVH facility in Hungary, in the KFKI, the Institute of Research in Hungary. And that was very good, because a very good cooperation among these countries, with the Russians, with their computer codes, which are similar to RELAP but different, but also countries like Brazil, Argentina, and even the United States. The Texas A&M University participated. Dauria from Italy also participated. So that was very good project for a time, and the thing was progressing very well.
Well, you mentioned one thing that I wanted to pick up on. What were some of the issues with the VVER? What technical troubles were they having early on?
Well, the VVR 440 to 330s, they are designed with a very limited design-based accident. They only admit small break and medium break locus. They didn't have under design large break locus. And they have accumulators like our reactors have, but they didn't have they have 6 loops. Mm-hmm. So the accumulators don't inject in all the loops. So if you have a breaking loop where you have an accumulator and is different progression of the accident if you have an accident in another loop.
Has there ever been a large break loca in real operating plants?
No, they have breaks, but very small. And they don't have a containment also. The VVR 440 330 didn't have a containment. So we have to analyze all these type of things. And of course, they also have the pumps, don't have these big flywheels. So they don't have large inertia. When there is something, the pumps stop very early. So they have to do different behavior of the reactor. So all these kind of technical issues that we're solving with the simulations all the time. But then when I was 7 years working this project, I was very happy. I have a final contract to go back to Brazil. And then 2 things happened. First was Chernobyl, and the second was the end of Soviet Union. So from Chernobyl, Europe got realized that an accident anywhere is an accident everywhere. So the West Europe get scared.
Yes.
And they say, well, it's not sufficient that our reactors are safe. We want the reactors on the other side of the boundary to be safe also.
Can I ask about that? Because I understand that is the common wisdom, and that was understood at the time, that an accident anywhere is an accident everywhere. But now that we know a little bit more, we saw how the accident at Fukushima progressed, and we saw how radionuclides dispersed from that. Can't we say that maybe for an RBMK type, where there could be a fire that could spread a lot of radionuclides up into the atmosphere and then far directions, maybe that is an accident anywhere, it can be an accident everywhere. But can't we now come to the conclusion that for a light water reactor, that the scope of the accident is far more limited?
Well, if you have a containment, yes.
Let's say even not an official containment, but a strong building.
Yeah.
And so not much would get out, but a little bit getting out is different than a lot getting out in terms of the effect on the public and how far it can travel.
Well, I don't know. After Fukushima, you saw the difficulties that they have at Fukushima, and they have even if they have a small containment or the limited containment of the material, then they have dispersion in the environment.
Yes,
of course, it was not big dispersion, but caused lots of trouble.
Okay, but that's
evacuation,
right. So that's what I want to get to, because it really was the evacuation and the response to it that caused so much damage. But we can now look at how far the radionuclides spread and the amount that left containment, and we can say definitively that a light water reaccident is just not as bad as an RBMK accident.
that's true. That's one
It
thing.
seems, just I guess, and I'll let you continue with your story, but that's just one of the things that, as I meet more people, it keeps playing out in my head. We've written all of these rules across the world for the worst case scenario, for the worst type of reactor, but we haven't really made a good distinction between different size reactors, different type reactors. It's the ultimate safety for everything instead of the right safety case for the right size reactor.
I would say that the probability is smaller in the VVR or in the light water reactor.
But the probability is not what I'm so concerned about. The consequence is what I'm concerned about.
But the consequence, there is always the possibility of a worse scenario, and then you may have difficulties even with the light water reactor.
Okay, we'll continue, but that is a point that I want to keep exploring further.
Well, let me go back to the situation. We have people realize that your reactor is safe, but you want the other reactor to be safe too. So at this time, agents create a special project to improve the safety of VVR reactors. And also this was supported by the European community. And the BRD, the European Bank for Research and Development, created a large fund for that. And this project was created in the agents, and I was invited to join. I said, I'm going back to Brazil, I'm finishing the project. And I was hired by the project, I was not staff of the agents anymore. I was hired by the project because I was the only person that for 7 years have worked with VVR reactors at the agents. So they say, you are essential to be here. And what we did, the first thing we did was a design review of we are focused on VVR 440-330, which was the oldest one. There was some in Slovakia, Bulgaria, and 2 sites in Russia. So we decided to focus on that. We did a design review, large meeting in Vienna. We identified all the deficiencies. And then we did a safety mission, we call a safety mission in each one of the sites. A safety mission was what I used to do in my group, which was a design review, plus what the OSAR group, the operational safety review teams, used to do on the operational side. So we'll have something like 15, 20 people going to the plant and look at design aspects and operational aspects. So the design aspect will be seismic design, this accident analysis, instrumentation control, the problems of radiation shielding, and of course, accident analysis. And the people in operation will do the normal OSAR covering management, emergency planning, operational procedures, emergency operating procedures, and fire protection, this type of thing. So we did this mission. I did the first mission in Bohunice, which is very near Vienna, and we were very eager to do the mission. Then the second colleague did Novorossiysk in Russia, in Soviet Union still at that time. Yes. And I did the second mission in Kola, which is in the north of Russia, in Murmansk, near Murmansk. And then there was a fourth mission in Kozloduy, where they're operating 4 VVR 440s. And these missions identify lots of problems, many problems, very, detailed. And I decided to join then what we call safety issues. For instance, one expert will say, well, this instrument is not sufficient. This instrument is not adequate. This other instrument is old. This other instrument cannot be calibrated. All these problems was connected to a problem of instrumentation control deficiency. And we call this an issue, instrumentation control deficiency.
Aggregating the issues, very smart.
Fire protection. One expert said the fire doors are not closed, the fire extinguisher is not proper, the amount of water for fire is not proper. So fire protection issue. And we identified about 100 issues for the VVR 440s.
Wow.
And we then ranked these issues.
Triage. It's like a doctor. You perform triage.
Yeah, because we say, well, they cannot solve all the problems. So we ranked them in 4 levels. Level 1, very minor things that you can do. Level 2, level 3, and level 4. Level 4 requires urgent action. Okay? Level 3 requires action as soon as possible to solve the problem. Level 2, if you can do something, you can improve in the future. And level 3, okay, you can improve a fire door or something like that. So we ranked those. And then after they start to implement that with funds from the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, then we passed to the next step, which was the VVR 404-213, which were in Hungary, in there was one in Finland, which was quite different project, and there was also, I think, in Ukraine. So we started doing, it was a more modern VVR reactor design. They have a containment in the different type, but they have a certain containment. And then we did the same thing, did emissions to the reactors, to Hungary in parks, to the other plants, and then we identify issues and we rank the issues. Then the next step was the 1,000 megawatt reactors. They were based in Ukraine and in Russia. And by the end of the project, we decided to go to the RBM case. So we did a mission in Lithuania, where they have the largest RBM case.
Is that shut down now?
Yeah, now
when they joined the European Union, they shut down. Yes.
By that time, they were both they were derated, but they were still functioning. Then there was Ukraine, where they have several RBM cases, and also in Russia. I went to St. Petersburg and I went to Chernobyl to see, because at that time, in spite of the accident, Chernobyl, which had 4 units, one was damaged by the accident.
3 kept running.
The unit 2 was damaged by a fire in the turbine, but 1 and 3 were still functioning. So we went there, we identify also problems there, and they end up shutting down the plants later on.
Much later. I mean, they kept running that last plant at Chernobyl. They ran until year 2000, 14 years later.
Yeah, but the same thing with the VVR 404-230s. They operated for several years until they managed to shut down. Because, for instance, in Bulgaria, we say if you shut down the reactor, half of the country will be in the dark.
Right.
Okay.
And that just shows you how important energy is.
In Armenia was the same. In Armenia, they have almost 50% of the power was from 2 VVR 440.
Oh, really?
So they say we cannot shut down this reactor, so we'll do the improvements as soon as possible and things like that. So that was the project. But with time, what happened is that this country, end of Soviet Union, these countries start to have bilateral agreements with the US, with the European community. They start to be independent. They divided, unfortunately, too. Czechoslovakia became Czech and Slovakia.
Right.
Yugoslavia became 5 countries, and all these kinds of things. And the project, our project, the special project for Soviet designed reactors, became less important, and funds were not available anymore. People start to leave it, and they start to do bilateral. And at that time, I thought it's time to go back to Brazil, 14. And at that time, Brazil decided to finish Angra 2 plant that I have left halfway through construction.
Your timing is perfect both times.
And have been slowly. They never stopped construction, but they were very slowly. And it was 14 years in Vienna, and the plant was not ready yet. So I came back at the time that Brazil decided to finish Angra 2. So I came to the commission and returned to commission to my old job.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
At the commission, first they tried to utilize my experience with the IEA. So although Angra 2 was under finishing construction and I could help a lot with that, with experience for Angra 1, I got involved with the safety convention. That's one of the consequences of Chernobyl, is that you have to make sure that all the reactors have the same level of safety. So immediately after Chernobyl, 2 international conventions were developed. One for the notification case of accident that the Soviets didn't do during Chernobyl.
Right.
And the second one in assistance in case of accident, because they realized that some countries cannot cope with the aftermath of the accident. And then with more time, there was a development of the Convention on Nuclear Safety. And that was very important. Was a creation of what we call an international nuclear safety regime. The main pillar is the Convention on Nuclear Safety, which requires that all the countries, the objective of all the countries have the same level of safety, and requires that you report every 3 years to your partners, to your parts, how is the situation of nuclear safety in your country. Okay, so when I came back, they say, why don't you get involved with that? I was involved with the development of the convention in Vienna. And when I came back to Brazil, I was involved with the preparation of the national report of Brazil. I prepared the first national report. Brazil has signed the convention at the beginning and was ratified in 98. So in 98, we prepared the report showing the situation of safety in Brazil. And that was a very nice work. I coordinated. I was not only the author of the report, was a coordination with the Electronuclear, which was the operator of the power plant, with the CNEN, which is the regulator, and then the IBAMA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency that was giving the license for the environment, and also with CIPRON, which is our national emergency coordination for nuclear accidents. So all these groups were involved when they prepared the report and presented in Vienna at that time.
Wow. And then, so what was the next phase of your career?
Well, because of this involvement, first when I came, I was in the post as advisor to director of nuclear safety in the commission. But because of the relevance of the Convention on Nuclear Safety, I was invited to be the advisor to the president of CNEN in matters of safety.
Yes.
So I became advisor to the president of CNEN. He's still involved with especially with the national reports, and I prepared the 6 national reports that Brazil organized. Then there was a signature also of the Convention on Waste, Radioactive Waste and Nuclear Fuel, irradiated fuel. And because of my experience, they also requested me to coordinate the group of the first report. But then I said, this is not my area. I'm not in the waste. So I trained someone that was in charge of preparing the following reports on this waste. But those conventions, as I said, are the pillar of what we call the International Nuclear Safety Regime that was created after Chernobyl. The International Nuclear Safety Regime is much broader. It involves what we call the binding safety conventions. So you're volunteered to sign the convention, but once you volunteer, you have obligations. The second pillar is the international accepted nuclear safety standards, okay, which are the standards of the agency, basically. And the third pillar is a system of peer reviews. So the convention requires that you report every 3 years. You have a format for the report. This report is delivered 6 months in advance of a review meeting. All the countries have reviewed the reports of their counterparts, and then there is a meeting where you explain that, and there is discussion, and there are recommendations for the countries, and then recommendations to the agents on the next step, so that you levelize the level of safety. The international standards, when I came to the agents, what we had was the NUS program, Nuclear Safety Standards, which was 5 codes of practice and about 50 regulatory guides. This was reorganized after Chernobyl because we realized that we need much more detailed recommendations. They created a commission for nuclear safety standard and 4 committees. One for nuclear safety, one for radiation protection, one for waste, and one for transport. So all the areas were covered. And each one of these committees was in charge of developing their standards. So the number of standards now, I don't know, but it's probably more than 100.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and they are covered all these 4 areas. They are constantly being revised. And there is a big hierarchy that we have safety principles, then requirements, and safety guides. And there is the original tech talk documents.
Let me ask.
Let me finish just the 4th pillar, or the 3rd pillar, which is the peer review system. As you know, the Convention on Nuclear Safety is an incentive convention. There's no enforcement powers. The agents cannot say you do that, and other countries cannot do. But there is a system of peer review and peer pressure. So after 3 Mile Island, in the United States was created INPO, Institute of Nuclear Power Operation, realizing the importance of operating reactors. After Chernobyl was created WANO, the World Nuclear Operators Association. So WANO covers all the countries, including Russia, and Soviet Union, and the countries of the East Europe, so that you have operational safety. At the same time, the agency had the OSART missions, the operational safety review missions, and like WANO, they do reviews of the plants, but they also create other services like review of seismic design, review of the radiation protection, transport, review of transport situation in the country. And especially they create what's called nowadays IRRS, International Regulatory Review Service, that reviews the regulatory system of a country. I think that's the only area in the world, the only technology that have their regulatory system reviewed by the international organization. And that is very nice because you go to the countries and you review the situation of how safety is regulated in the country. So I participate in some of the missions. I did a mission in United Emirates when they start constructing their reactors. And I did participate in the Belgian situation where they have two regulatory bodies, actually one for radiation protection, one for nuclear safety. And I did a review in Chile where they don't have nuclear power plant, but they have research reactors. But the missions, I think they're conducting 3 or 4 missions per year in all the countries. And the missions make recommendations based on the requirements of the agency, and they have follow-ups a few years later, which is... So these 3 pillars, the conventions, the standards, and the peer system, is what is supposed to levelize the level of safety in all the world.
Yes. Let me ask, is it possible that all of this infrastructure, all of this regulatory infrastructure, the inspections, the paperwork, the conventions, that it's all too much for, let's say, a small reactor, for the next generation of reactors, which might be 10 megawatts even, so 100 times smaller than the big ones, where the consequences would be 100 times smaller? Is it possible that these could be excluded from the burden of all of these conventions?
Well, if you read the agency documents, the standards especially, you see that there is always this sentence saying this should be applied in a graded approach. The graded approach idea is that, of course, you have to look at the requirements of the agency, even you have to look at the safety guides, but then you have the opportunity to say, okay, the risk that I have on this facility is so small that I don't have to apply that. I don't have to do the seismic analysis of a source in a hospital, But all the other requirements, you have to look and say, well, what about fire protection? That I have a nuclear power plant. It's a very complicated thing. But I need fire protection also in the hospital, which has a small source, because if this hospital burns, even the shielding can be melted by a fire. So you have all the agency requirements are applicable to everywhere, but on a graded approach. That's the idea.
I see. And then what about ABEN? How did you join up with ABEN, and what is ABEN's function?
Well, I was working in the agency in the CNEN with these reports, but after changes in government, I went back to be advisor to the superintendent for nuclear safety, and then to the director again for nuclear safety, Ivan Salati, who was a good friend of mine. And we got involved with the license of Angra 2, and also with the license of the Navy facilities, especially in Sorocaba, where they constructed the land-based nuclear reactor, which will be a model for the submarine reactor. So I was involved with that. We gave the license. That's why I have this medal of the friend of Navy. And but then with changes in government, I decided to retire. I had more than enough time for retirement. And I retired officially. And I still got involved with some of the activities of the IAEA. As I mentioned, I did some of the IIRS as a retiree. And I also got involved with the WNU, the World Nuclear University, which organize every summer. They have a summer institute. And I participate first as a lecturer, but later on as a mentor, which means you stay during the 6 weeks during the summer institute, and you got a group of 10 people to whom you are a mentor. And I did a mentorship in Uppsala, and then in Ottawa, in Canada, and then back in Uppsala for 3 years. It was very nice. But then I decided to stop completely. So the last 2 years, for 2 years, I didn't do any nuclear activity. And last year they called me and they say, Claudio, you are out of the circuit. Why don't you come back and come to the ABEN? I was always involved with LAS. LAS is the Latin American section of American Nuclear Society. It's also a professional society, but very small. We organize a meeting every 2 or 3 years, and it was not very important like that. Like ABEN is different. No, we have 10 societies related to nuclear in Brazil. Nuclear physics, nuclear medicine, biophysics, and radiation protection. But ABEN is the largest one in scope. We cover all the areas, energy, applications, radiation protection, in all the utilization of nuclear energy. So it was a kind of challenging, and Olga Cymbalista was the former president. She said, no, we'll assist you. And also they invite 2 of my ex-colleagues to be vice president. Paulo Ribas, which I know from the beginning of Angra 1, and Roberto Esteves, who used to be the president of INB. So when they form a team, and of course they have the team that was already working in ABEN, I decided to join. I said, okay, let's see if we can work still a few more years and produce something here. And now we have this large meeting in INAC, the International Nuclear Atlantic Conference.
Conference right now.
Yeah, it's 10 times bigger than what I used to organize in LAS. And it's very challenging too, and I'm very happy with that.
Amazing. So maybe as we wrap up here, why don't you just tell us, why is nuclear energy important to the world?
Well, it's important to the world, especially because if you look at the consumption of energy, especially in developing world, where our consumption is very low, the per capita world is very small. So when people start in the past talking about let's save energy and you don't need any nuclear energy, it's not true. Consumption will increase for sure. And although we have a very good progress on the green energy, what you call the wind power and solar power, these plants have a problem of being intermittent. They don't produce all the time. You don't know when you're going to have, and you can only produce when you have sun, when you have wind. So in Brazil, in Northeast, there is a very good possibility of using wind power. They have a constant wind, but we have to have energy for the bases. And this is why we need nuclear energy, especially for Brazil. But in the rest of the world is the same situation. If you look at the situation in China, which has 20 reactors, is constructing another 30, and probably is going to beat very soon all the other programs. But India is also in the same situation, and they need power. It's a country that is under development. You see Korea constructing reactors. You see Russia is constructing several reactors. And even if you look at Europe, where people tend to talk about Germany is shutting down reactor, but Finland is constructing one. Flamanville is being constructed in France, and even in the United Kingdom, you are constructing new reactors now. So everyone is relying on nuclear power for the base loads. And with the advantage that you can put the plants near your consumption center or where you need it, and you don't have to rely on the nature to produce energy when they want.
Claudio, Almeida, thank you so much.
Thank you.